After the night with uncomfortable silence and the looming thick atmosphere of exactly what that picture meant that Songyun has not been able to fully explain, the call came at 6:53 a.m. Not her lawyer's ringtone. Her lawyer's personal number. The one he used when something had already happened and the next conversation needed to happen before she'd had coffee, or shoes on, or any of the psychological preparation that made bad news easier to receive standing up. She answered on the second ring. "There's been a filing," he said. "Overnight. Young Kyung Park's legal team. Estate challenge. Blood heir claim. Formally submitted to the court at 11:47 p.m. A pause. They moved fast. Faster than I expected. Ivanka sat up. Who is the claimant? A Daniel Park. 33. The filing lists him as the biological son of your biological father, through a relationship that predates your parents' marriage." Another pause, smaller. "Ivanka, the documentation they've submitted is substantial. This wasn't assembled quickly. This has been prepared for a long time." The bedroom was very still. Early light coming through the curtains, pale and indifferent. The city outside not yet fully awake. "Send everything to my office," she said. "I'll be there at 8. She hung up. She sat on the edge of the bed for 4 seconds. Then she stood, walked to the bathroom, turned the shower on cold, and stood under it for a minute without flinching. Songyun was already at the office when she arrived. Not waiting for her. Working, his jacket over the chair, 3 documents open across the desk, Jiyeon on the phone in the corner running a name through what sounded like a registry search. He looked up when she walked in and read her face in the 2 seconds before she'd fully crossed the room. "You saw the filing," he said. "My lawyer called at 7. She set her bag down. Daniel Park. Something happened in Songyun's face. Small. Fast. Gone before it completed itself. But she had been watching this man's face for weeks in rooms where everything mattered, and she caught it the way you catch a sound in a building that's supposed to be empty. "You know that name," she said. He looked at the documents on the desk. "Songyun." "Not here," he said quietly. "Tonight. I'll tell you everything tonight." He looked up. "Right now you need to read the filing, and we need to understand what they've actually submitted before your lawyer walks in at 9. She looked at him for a moment. She let it go. Not because she was satisfied, because he had never once given her a reason not to trust his sequencing, and the filing was real and immediate, and the thing underneath it could wait 6 hours without getting worse than it already was. She sat down and picked up the documents. The filing was 43 pages. She read all of them. She had to acknowledge with the cold clarity she applied to things she didn't want to be true, extremely well constructed. Clean chronology. Medical documentation establishing biological connection. A sworn affidavit from Daniel Park himself, measured in tone, specific in detail, describing how he had come to learn of his father's estate and his legal entitlement to a portion of it. No mention of Young Kyung Park anywhere in the document. Not once. Not a footnote. Not an acknowledgement. Which meant her uncle had spent whatever time it took to build a 43-page legal challenge and then carefully removed every fingerprint before filing it. She set the last page down. "He prepared this before the ballroom," she said. "Before the beginning," Songyun said. "This was always the contingency. If the financial structure got exposed, the estate challenge was the fallback. A way to tie everything in litigation for years while he rebuilt the network. He needs Daniel to win for it to work. He needs Daniel to file. The filing alone creates the delay." Ivanka looked at the affidavit. Added Daniel Park's signature at the bottom. Clean, considered, the signature of a man who believed he was doing something legitimate. "He doesn't know," she said. "No. He thinks he's claiming what's his." "Yes." She looked at the signature for another moment. Lovely's. The uncle just played his most dangerous card yet. And the terrifying part? Daniel Park has no idea he's holding it. Drop in the comments, do you think Daniel is a villain or a victim? Because I genuinely want to know where you stand before the next scene changes everything. And if you're watching this without having subscribed yet, do it now. You are too deep in this story to lose the thread. Across the city, in a glass-fronted law firm on the 14th floor of a building Ivanka had never been inside, Daniel Park sat across from his legal team and listened to a summary of the overnight filing with his hands flat on the table and his face composed into the careful neutrality of a man who had learned, somewhere along the way, that showing what you felt in rooms like this was a form of losing. He was 33, dark-suited, the jawline from the photograph strong, clean, and eyes that were familiar in a way nobody in the room could have explained because nobody in the room knew what they were actually looking at. "The respondent's lawyers will file a counter within 10 days, his lead counsel said. "Standard timeline. We expect them to challenge the biological documentation first. It's their cleanest early move." "Let them," Daniel said. "The documentation is solid. Your uncle's team was thorough." Daniel looked at the table. "Your uncle. He had been careful, these past 18 months, about how he thought about Young Kyung Park. The man had appeared in his life with documents and answers, and the specific gravity of someone filling a space Daniel hadn't known was empty. The shape of a family, a history, a father he had never had access to. He had taken the legal support and the prepared case and told himself it was simply reclaiming what was his. He was 29 years old, and he had spent 29 years not knowing where he came from. That made a person receptive to a particular kind of story. He understood that. He just hadn't let himself look at it directly until now. What do we know about the respondent? He said. Ivanka, the woman contesting. His counsel pulled a folder. She's been aggressive in her own proceedings. Forensic accounting challenge against the estate's prior management. Fraud allegations against the deceased spouse. A separate criminal referral currently with the financial crimes unit. What's she like? Daniel said. The counsel looked up. As a person, Daniel said. What do people say? A pause. Formidable. Methodical. The coverage from the counsel glanced at notes. The public event earlier this month describes her as someone who had prepared significantly in advance. She's not reactive. Daniel nodded slowly. He picked up the counterfiling prediction document his team had prepared. Read the first page. Turned it over. On his phone, face down on the table, was a news article he had pulled at 6 a.m. and read 3 times before this meeting. A photograph accompanying it, the ballroom night, Ivanka walking out, Songyin beside her. He hadn't been able to explain, all morning, why her face in that photograph kept stopping him. He turned his phone face down again. Let's proceed, he said. He had found the discrepancy on a Wednesday. Not through anything his uncle's team had given him, through his own research, the habit of a man who had spent his career in corporate due diligence and understood that the documents you were handed were always less interesting than the documents you found yourself. He had been cross-referencing the estate timeline his uncle's lawyers had prepared against public records, property registrations, company filings, the kind of administrative paperwork that accumulated around a man's financial life like sediment, when he found a date that didn't match. Small thing. A property transfer, recorded 11 days earlier than the date his uncle's timeline listed as the point at which the estate had come under what the filing carefully called inappropriate third-party influence. 11 days shouldn't matter. Except the transfer was the foundational event the entire timeline was built around. If the date was wrong, the sequence was wrong. If the sequence was wrong, the characterization of what happened to the estate was wrong. He had sat with it for 3 days before he did anything. He had grown up in Edinburgh. His mother, or so he thought, a quiet, private woman named Song Hae-rin who had worked as a translator for 20 years and answered questions about his father with a particular gentle steadiness that he now understood was the steadiness of someone who had practiced the answer many times, had raised him alone, carefully, with the specific focused love of a woman who understood that what she was giving him had to be enough for 2 people. She had told him his father was Korean, that they had known each other briefly, that his father had not known about him, and that this was not a wound but simply a fact, the way geography was a fact, and that Daniel was not missing anything, because you could not miss what had never been present. He had believed her. Mostly. When Young Kyung Park had contacted him 18 months ago, Daniel had been sitting in his Edinburgh flat on a Sunday morning doing nothing in particular, which was the kind of detail that seemed irrelevant until you understood that a man with nothing particular to do on a Sunday morning was a man with space in his life for an unexpected phone call to rearrange everything. The uncle had been warm, patient, careful with the information, releasing it in the right order, letting Daniel ask questions, never pushing. He had documentation, photographs, medical records establishing the biological connection, a history of the estate and what had happened to it. He had told Daniel that his father was a good man who had been systematically betrayed by the people closest to him, and that Daniel was entitled to his inheritance, and that there were people currently misappropriating what should have come to him. He had said nothing about his sister, not in 18 months of conversations. Not once. Daniel found her name in the public filing records on a Thursday morning. Ivanka, respondent, estate proceedings. He had assumed the respondent was a lawyer, a trustee, someone administrative. He pulled the full record. Read her name, her relationship to the estate, her relationship to his father, daughter. He read it 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his Edinburgh flat and understood, with the particular cold clarity of a man whose due diligence instincts had just overridden every other system he had, that he had been given a version of a story with a significant character removed from it. He flew to the city 4 days later, not to withdraw the filing. The filing was legitimate regardless of what his uncle had or hadn't told him. The biological claim was real and documented, and the estate question was genuinely unresolved. But he came with different eyes than he'd had 18 months ago, when he'd first agreed to proceed. He came watching. The preliminary hearing was on a Tuesday. He arrived early, which was habit. Sat on his side of the room, his legal team arranged beside him, and watched the door. She walked in at 9:02. He recognized her from the photograph immediately, but photographs had not prepared him for the specific quality of her presence, which was not loud or dramatic, but had the effect of making the room slightly more organized around her without her doing anything deliberate to cause it. She didn't look at him when she entered. She looked at her lawyers, then at the documents they placed in front of her, then at the presiding officer. Methodical, unhurried. Then she looked across the room. At him. 3 seconds. Direct, clear, the look of someone cataloging rather than reacting. Then back to her documents. He felt, in those 3 seconds, the specific discomfort of being accurately assessed by someone who had not yet decided what you were. The hearing ran 90 minutes. Procedural, largely. Timelines established. Documentation schedules set. The legal machinery of a contested estate proceeding grinding through its early gears. He answered questions from the presiding officer in measured sentences. She answered questions from hers the same way. At one point they were asked to confirm their respective relationships to the deceased for the record. His counsel spoke first. Biological son. Her counsel second. Daughter. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Daniel looked at the table. In the corridor afterward, the crowd of lawyers thinned quickly. People with other hearings, other buildings, other problems. His counsel was on the phone 3 steps ahead of him. She was 20 feet away, coat on, bag over her shoulder, saying something brief to her lawyer that ended the conversation in 2 sentences. Then she was walking toward the exit. She passed him at 4 feet. She glanced at him. He nodded. He wasn't sure why. Some reflex of acknowledgement, of recognizing that whatever was happening between them in courtrooms and legal documents was also happening between 2 actual people in an actual corridor and deserved at minimum a nod. She stopped. She looked at him properly. The same cataloging look from the hearing room, but closer now, and something in it had changed slightly. Less assessing. More like someone checking a suspicion. You're filing, she said. The date on the foundational property transfer. Page 9. He went very still. It's wrong, she said. By 11 days. She held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she walked out. He stood in the corridor alone. His counsel was still on the phone ahead of him, oblivious. He looked at the exit door closing behind her. She had found the same discrepancy, which meant she wasn't just formidable and methodical. She had read his 43-page filing closely enough to find the one date that undermined it, and instead of using it against him in the hearing, she had told him. He didn't know what to do with that. He walked out into the cold air and stood on the pavement and thought about a woman who had every reason to dismantle him in that hearing room and had instead, in 4 words, handed him a crack in the foundation of his own case. He thought about his uncle's warm, unhurried voice on 18 months of phone calls. He thought about the name his uncle had never once said. He took his phone out. He stood there for a long time. Then he called his mother. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, her voice carrying the particular warmth of a woman who had spent 33 years making sure her son always had somewhere that picked up. Hey Rin, he said. He hadn't called her that since he was a teenager. I need you to tell me about my father. Everything. Not the version you thought I could handle. A silence on the line. Long enough that the city moved around him. A bus, 2 people arguing cheerfully outside a coffee shop, a child on a bicycle. All of it ordinary and indifferent. Daniel, his mother said quietly. Please, he said. Another silence. Then she began. Lovelies. She found the crack in his case and she handed it to him. Why would Ivanka do that? Drop your theory in the comments, because I am reading every single one. And if you've made it this far without subscribing, what are you doing? Hit subscribe. This is where this story becomes something none of us are ready for. She waited until the office was empty. Not because she needed privacy from Ji-Yun or the legal team, but because what she was about to do required a room that wasn't performing anything. No one working at adjacent desks. No phones ringing. No professional context to hide inside. She waited until 8:15 p.m. when the last person left. Then she closed the door, sat across from Songyun, and put both hands flat on the desk. Now, she said. He had known it was coming. He'd had since the hearing room to prepare whatever version of this he intended to give her. She watched him decide, in real time, to abandon the prepared version. He leaned forward. Your mother had a relationship before the marriage, he said. Not briefly. 3 years. The man's name was Park Sung-jin. He was Blasian and a junior architect at a firm your uncle owned. Young, careful, serious. Your uncle introduced them. At the time, everyone assumed it was genuine. Your uncle being generous. Playing matchmaker for his sister. Ivanka said nothing. It wasn't generosity, Songyun said. Park Sung-jin had access to intellectual property belonging to a competitor firm. Your uncle wanted it. Your mother was how he got close enough to extract it.
He paused.
By the time your mother understood what she'd been used for, the relationship was over and she was pregnant. The office was very quiet. Your uncle made sure she understood what public knowledge of the circumstances would do, Songyun continued. To the child.
To her.
He framed it as protection. He would handle it, keep it quiet, make sure the child was placed well. What he was actually doing was acquiring a debt your mother could never repay and a person, Daniel, he could position and use whenever the timing served him. He manufactured Daniel's entire origin story, Ivanka said. From birth. Daniel was raised in Edinburgh by his mother, a woman your uncle chose and paid and kept close enough to monitor. Daniel knows nothing about any of this. He was told his father was Korean, that the relationship was brief, that his father never knew about him. Songyun looked at her directly. Every true thing he believes is true. Everything surrounding it is architecture your uncle built. Ivanka registered the word, but let it go.
My father, she said.
Did he know? Songyun was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said.
She looked at the desk.
He found out 2 years into the marriage. Your mother told him, not because she wanted to, because your uncle told her to. He wanted it on record inside the marriage. Another layer of control. Songyun's voice stayed even, which she understood cost him something. Your father processed it and stayed. Not because he was naive. Because he had decided what the marriage was and what you were to him, and he was not a man who revised those decisions based on what your uncle wanted them to mean. She straightened the corner of a document on the desk.
Once. Precisely.
He never told me, she said. He was protecting you from something that had nothing to do with you. Songyun leaned forward slightly. Ivanka. He loved you without qualification. That letter, everything in it, that was not a man performing fatherhood. That was a man who chose it completely. She looked at the document she'd just straightened. Her throat did the thing it did.
Once.
Then she didn't let it. When did he tell you, she said. 6 months before he died. He called me to London, sat across from me in a restaurant, and laid the whole thing out. Daniel, your uncle, the estate structure, what he suspected was coming. Songyun held her gaze. He asked me to find Daniel when the time came. Not to use him. Not to weaponize him. To make sure he had accurate information before your uncle used him as a filing and discarded him. The room absorbed that. Outside, the city ran its late evening, distant traffic, someone's music through the wall, the building settling into its nighttime sounds. He thought about Daniel, she said. Even then. He thought about everyone, Songyun said. That was the thing about him. He could be furious about what your uncle had done and still think about a 25-year-old man in Edinburgh who hadn't done anything wrong. Ivanka was quiet for a long moment. She thought about her father in a London restaurant, laying out the map of everything that had been done to his family, thinking clearly enough to include a young man who shared his wife's blood and his enemy's upbringing in the list of people who needed protecting. She thought about the letter. You were always the one I didn't worry about. She understood now what that had cost him to write. To know what he knew and still mean it. The date discrepancy in the filing, she said. Page 9. I know. I told him. Songyun looked at her. In the corridor. He found it himself, she said. He's in due diligence. He reads documents the way we do. She looked up. He's not the uncle's weapon. He's a man who was handed a story with a piece removed, and he's smart enough to feel the absence. Yes. My father wanted you to find him, she said. Give him accurate information. Make sure the uncle couldn't use him. She held Songyun's gaze. That's what I'm doing. Songyun looked at her for a moment. Something in his face that arrived and stayed this time instead of passing through. I know, he said.
Set up the meeting, she said.
Not through lawyers. Somewhere without a conference table. She stood. And Songyun. He looked up. The next time my father tells you something from the grave, she said, you have 48 hours to tell me before I find it myself. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. 48 hours, he said. Don't push it. Chloe called her uncle 4 times that week. He answered once. Briefly. His voice warm and unhurried as always, which was how she knew something had changed. The warmth now had the specific quality of something being managed rather than felt, the difference between a fire and a photograph of one. He told her to be patient, that the filing was proceeding, that her role was simply to stay available. Available for what? She said. I'll be in touch, he said. He hung up before she could ask again. She sat with the phone in her hand in her apartment. The apartment that still had the envelope on the coffee table, still had Marcus's thread bookmarked in her browser at 14,000 comments, still had the specific silence of a space that nobody visited anymore. Available. She turned the word over. She had burned Marcus. She had burned Ethan. She had walked into Songyun's building and made an approach that she still couldn't fully revisit without her face going hot, and she had been removed from it in one sentence and walked into her sister's office and said things that she'd meant and that had landed like thrown objects and achieved nothing except making Ivanka look at her with that particular expression. Not anger, not hurt, just done. That haunted her more than anger would have.
She had sent the address.
She had told herself it was just information. She knew it wasn't. And now she was available. She opened her laptop. She had spent the last 3 days building something. Nothing dramatic, not a confrontation. Something more corrosive. A document. Anonymous. Carefully worded. Assembled from partial truths and strategic omissions in the way she had watched her uncle operate for 18 months without fully realizing she was taking notes. It detailed Songyun's criminal network connections. Selectively sourced. Technically accurate in its component facts. Completely dishonest in what it implied. It suggested Ivanka's evidence had been manufactured with the help of a man whose own legal history made him an unreliable architect of anyone's justice. She had sent it to 4 people. A journalist who covered financial crime and had a wide reach and a taste for complexity. 2 of Ethan's former business partners who had publicly distanced themselves but privately, she knew, still wanted a version of events that made their association with him look less foolish. And 1 person inside the financial crimes unit, not a senior official, just someone junior enough to be accessible, senior enough to matter. She told herself it wasn't personal. Her laptop screen reflected her face back at her in the dark of the apartment. She closed it. He chose a restaurant. Not strategic. He had simply walked past it on the way to his hotel the previous evening and noted that it was quiet and had corner tables with enough distance between them that a conversation could stay private without effort. He texted the address to the number she had given his lawyer. She replied with 1 word.
Fine.
He arrived first. Ordered water. Sat with his back to the wall the way his mother had always told him to in new places, which had seemed like an odd thing for a translator from Edinburgh to know and which now, understanding more about the people who had moved through his mother's life, seemed less odd. She walked in at 7 exactly. No lawyer. She had said no lawyers, and he had agreed, and he had half expected her to bring one anyway, which would have told him something. She didn't. Coat, bag, the same quality of settled composure he'd clocked across the hearing room. Close up, it was even less performative than it had looked from a distance. She wasn't working to appear calm. She simply was. She sat across from him. She looked at his face. He knew what she was doing because he had done it himself in the mirror that morning, looking for the shared geometry. The jawline, the brow line, the specific way certain features distributed themselves across a face that carried particular genetics. You found it too, he said. The date. Before the hearing. 3 days before. You didn't use it.
No.
Why? She considered him for a moment. Because you're not the problem. He looked at his water glass. Your lawyers would disagree. My lawyers are paid to disagree with the filing, she said. That's different from disagreeing with you. The restaurant moved around them. A couple 2 tables over. A waiter crossing the room. The low sound of a kitchen doing its work somewhere behind a closed door. Your uncle never mentioned me, she said. Not a question.
No.
18 months. No. She nodded slowly, like something confirmed rather than something learned. He told you the estate was being misappropriated, she said. By someone who married into the family. Yes. He gave you documentation. A timeline. A legal team already prepared. Yes. And you believed him. Daniel looked at her directly. I believed the parts one could verify. I didn't look hard enough at what I couldn't.
He paused.
I was 29 and someone handed me a father. That affects your due diligence. Something shifted in her face. Small, fast, the first crack in the composure. Not pity, something more precise than that. He told me my father was a good man who was betrayed by the people closest to him, Daniel said. That part was true. He just didn't mention that he was the one who betrayed him. She told him about the letter. Not all of it. She kept the personal parts personal, which he respected without saying so. But she told him that their father had known about him,
Had thought about him.
had included him in the careful architecture of what he left behind, in the circle of people who deserved to know the truth. Daniel listened. He kept his hands flat on the table and listened with the focused stillness of a man holding himself very together around something that was trying to come apart.
He knew I existed, Daniel said.
Yes. And he stopped. He wanted you to have accurate information, she said. That's the exact phrase Songyun used. Not contact. Not a relationship. Just accurate information. The real version of where you came from instead of the one you were handed. Daniel looked at the table. He thought about his mother's voice on the phone 3 nights ago. The silence before she began. The way she had told it. carefully, chronologically, with the specific exhaustion of a woman setting down something she had carried for 30 years. Park Sung-jin, his biological grandfather's firm, the intellectual property, the relationship that wasn't what it appeared, the pregnancy, the arrangement, his uncle from the very beginning.
She knew, he said.
My mother. About your uncle's involvement. Yes. She protected me from it. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, the city went about its evening. People moving in both directions on the pavement, a child pulling at someone's hand, a bus passing and throwing light across the glass.
The filing, he said.
It's legitimate, she said immediately. Your biological claim is real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it's being used. Yes. By someone who doesn't intend to let me keep anything I win, he said. Because the moment I've served my purpose as a delay mechanism, I become inconvenient. She said nothing.
She didn't need to.
He picked up his water glass, set it down without drinking. I called my mother after the corridor, he said. After you told me about the date. He looked at her. Why did you do that? You had every reason to use it. She met his gaze. Because our father would have told you himself. The table was very quiet. He looked at her face, the jawline that matched his, the eyes that were doing something careful and honest across the candlelight, and thought about a man he had never met who had apparently spent the last years of his life thinking about a son in Edinburgh and a daughter in a courtroom, and trying to build something that would reach them both. He reached into his jacket. He placed his copy of the uncle's documentation on the table between them, the full file, the timeline, the characterization of Ivanka as the person who had wronged the estate. Everything the uncle had spent 18 months assembling. He pushed it across the table toward her. She looked at it, then at him. I'll need your lawyer's number, he said. And I'll need you to understand that I'm not doing this for the estate. I don't want what's yours. He held her gaze. I want to know what actually happened to him. To our father. The real version. She looked at the file on the table between them. She picked it up. You'll have the lawyer's number tonight, she said. And Daniel. She looked at him. The real version is worse than what your uncle told you. I know, he said. You don't yet, she said. Not unkindly, just accurate. He held her gaze. Then tell me, he said. She did. She started at the beginning, not the ballroom, not even the affair. Further back than that. The freight corridor, the codicil, the forged signatures, the cardiac workup 8 weeks before a clean bill of health became a death certificate. She told it the way she'd read Banwo's files, chronologically, without editorializing, letting the sequence carry its own weight. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the restaurant had thinned around them. The couple 2 tables overgone, the kitchen quieter, the waiter refilling their water and disappearing again without comment. Daniel sat with it. A long time. He killed him, Daniel said. We believe so. Proving it is the part we're still working on. The government official. Yes. He nodded slowly. Processing. The due diligence brain working through it in the same way she'd watched it work across a hearing room, methodical, not panicked, assembling rather than reacting. I have access, Daniel said, to 18 months of your uncle's communications with me. Documented. Every call, every meeting, every piece of documentation he gave me, and when he gave it. He looked at her. It's not the official, but it builds the map of how he operates, how he constructs the story around a target. Ivanka was very still. That's the methodology, she said. If we can show the same method applied to our father. It becomes a pattern, he said. Not one incident. A documented pattern with a living witness. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. 2 people with the same jawline in a quiet restaurant with a dead man's file between them and 18 months of their uncle's voice on a phone recording that was about to become the most important piece of evidence in a case their father had spent 3 years building alone. Welcome to the worst family reunion in history, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then something happened in his face. Unexpected, unguarded. A short exhale that was almost a laugh. I've had worse weeks, he said. She picked up her water glass. No, you haven't, she said. He conceded that with a tilt of his head. For the first time since the hearing room, the table between them felt like a table 2 people were sitting at rather than a boundary between opposing sides. It wasn't warmth yet. It was something earlier than warmth. The specific tentative quality of 2 people who have just decided, without announcing it, to try. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Songyan. 1 line. Chloe's document is circulating. Financial crimes contact called. We have a problem. She set the phone face down. Looked at Daniel. How quickly can you get your uncle's communications to my lawyer, she said. The almost warmth at the table shifted back into something operational. He read her face and didn't ask what had happened. Tomorrow morning, he said. Tonight, she said. He reached for his phone. Chloe's document had 6 hours of momentum before Ji-eun killed it. Not cleanly. You couldn't kill something like that cleanly once it had touched a journalist and 2 former business partners and someone inside a regulatory body. But Ji-eun found the origin point through a metadata trace that took her 4 hours and a level of focused aggression that Ivanka had not previously witnessed from a woman who conducted herself with the precision of a surgeon in all other contexts. The journalist pulled the piece before publishing. Reluctantly, after a phone call from Songyun's legal team that lasted 11 minutes and covered, in detail, the legal exposure of publishing selectively sourced material designed to obstruct an active financial crimes investigation. The 2 former business partners had already forwarded it to 3 people each. The person inside the financial crimes unit had forwarded it to their supervisor. Their supervisor had forwarded it up. Ivanka found out at 7 a.m. when her financial crimes contact, the clean one, the verified one, the contact Songyun had spent 8 months protecting from any channel her uncle could touch, called and said 4 words before anything else. "We've been blocked. Above." She sat down. "How far above?" she said. "Far enough that my supervisor got a call I wasn't supposed to know about and spent the rest of yesterday avoiding eye contact with me." A pause. Someone with institutional authority flagged our referral as procedurally compromised, citing the circulating document as evidence of bad faith filing. "Chloe's document is anonymous and unverified. I know that. You know that." Another pause. "The person who flagged it knows that too. That's not the point." She understood. The document wasn't meant to convince anyone. It was meant to create a procedural fingerhold, something small and technical that a person in the right position could use to introduce delay, doubt, a reason to pause and review. The content didn't matter. The mechanism did. "Who made the call to your supervisor?" she said. "I don't have a name. I have a title." He paused. "Deputy Commissioner. Financial Regulatory Authority." She wrote it down. "Thank you," she said. "Don't call this number again until I contact you." She hung up. She looked at what she'd written. "Deputy Commissioner. Financial Regulatory Authority." She picked up her pen and drew a single line underneath it. Then she called Songyun. He arrived in 40 minutes with Ji-eun and a file she hadn't seen before, thinner than the others, maybe 12 pages, held together with a single clip. He put it on the desk without preamble. "His name is Kwon Dae-young," Songyun said. 64. Deputy Commissioner of the Financial Regulatory Authority for 11 years. Before that, private sector, compliance director at a logistics firm. He looked at her. The logistics firm dissolved 14 years ago. Ivanka looked at the file. "Your uncle's firm," she said. "Yes." She opened it. Kwon Dae-young looked back at her from a staff photograph. Heavy-set, silver-haired, the face of a man who had spent decades in institutional corridors and learned to look like the furniture. "He's been there 11 years, she said. "He was placed before my father died." "Yes." "My father knew about him." "Banwo's secondary file," Songyun said. Page 31. "Kwon is listed by title only. Your father didn't have his name, just the position. He knew there was someone inside the regulatory structure. He couldn't get to the name." Ivanka turned to page 31 of Banwo's file, which she had opened on the desk beside the new one. Found the reference. 3 lines. Her father's handwriting, slightly looser than the earlier pages, the tiredness showing through. "Senior regulatory contact. FRA level. Identity unconfirmed. This is the ceiling. Without identifying and removing this contact, the financial case cannot reach the uncle directly. Everything below this point is containable for him." She read it twice. This is the ceiling. Her father had known. 3 years before he died. He had mapped the entire structure, identified the gap he couldn't close, and written it down with the patient honesty of a man documenting his own limitations. She closed the file. "Can we go around him?" she said. "Directly to the commissioner," Songyun said. "Yes. But the commissioner will refer it back down for preliminary review, which lands on Kwon's desk, which is a 6 to 8 week delay minimum. Above the commissioner. Ministerial level. Possible but slow, and it requires a level of documented evidence that withstands a challenge from someone with 11 years of institutional credibility." He paused. "We need something that makes Kwon impossible to defend. Not just his connection to your uncle, that can be explained away as prior employment. Something current. Something that shows active interference. The call to my contact supervisor. If we can prove it was him. Right now we have a title and a timeline. That's not enough." Ivanka looked at the ceiling of her office. She thought about her father's 3 lines. The gap he couldn't close. The ceiling he'd identified and died underneath. "Daniel's communications," she said. Songyun looked at her. 18 months of documented contact with my uncle, she said. Every call, every meeting, every piece of material passed between them. If Kwan's name appears anywhere in those communications, any reference, any instruction, any mention of a regulatory contact, it establishes current active coordination, Song-yin said. Yes. Daniel got the files to your lawyer last night? By midnight, she stood. I need Ji-yun on those communications today. Every page. Ji-yun, from the corner where she had been working through something on her laptop with the self-contained focus of a woman who processed best when people forgot she was in the room, looked up. Already started, she said. Ivanka looked at her. I anticipated, Ji-yun said simply, and looked back at her screen. Song-yin stayed after Ji-yun left. Not because there was more to discuss. The operational pieces were moving, the communications were being processed, the next step was waiting, which was the part of this Ivanka was worst at. He stayed because he had been watching her read her father's handwriting for the last hour and he understood, without her saying anything, that the 3 lines on page 31 had done something that the forged signatures and the shell companies and even the cardiac report hadn't quite done. Because those things were what her uncle had built. Page 31 was what her father had hit. She was standing at the window with her coffee gone cold in her hand, looking at the city, when he spoke. He got further than he thought, Song-yin said. Your father. He didn't have Kwan's name, but he had everything else. The methodology, the structure, the ceiling itself. He identified it even without being able to name it. He came to stand beside her. He handed us the map. We just had to find the last street. He died looking for it, she said. Yes. She looked at the city. A long time. I'm going to close it, she said. Just as a statement of fact, the way you'd confirm a meeting time or a document deadline. Everything he couldn't close. I'm going to close it. Song-yin said nothing. She felt him look at her, the specific quality of his attention when the operational distance dropped, and it was just him looking at her the way she'd caught him looking twice before and hadn't acknowledged either time. She didn't acknowledge it now, but she didn't move away from it either. Ji-yun will find something in Daniel's files, she said. And when she does, we move immediately. No waiting. Agreed. She turned from the window. Their proximity, which had seemed unremarkable a moment ago, registered differently in the half-second of turning. Close enough that she had to angle slightly, close enough that he didn't step back, close enough that the moment had a specific weight that neither of them manufactured and neither of them addressed. She picked up her cold coffee, made a face at it, set it back down. Get Ji-yun more coffee, she said. She's going to need it. He picked up both cups without comment and went to find the machine. She sat down and opened the next file. Her hands were steady. Her heart was doing something she continued to find irrelevant. Ji-yun found the name at 11:40 p.m. Not buried, hiding in plain sight inside a voice memo Daniel had recorded during a meeting with the uncle 8 months ago, the kind of documentation habit that came from due diligence training and that the uncle had apparently not thought to account for because he was accustomed to operating around people who trusted him enough not to take notes. The uncle's voice, clear and unhurried on the recording. Kwan will handle the regulatory layer. He's been in position long enough that a flag from his office carries automatic institutional weight. We won't need more than one intervention. The referral will stall long enough for the filing to run its course. 34 seconds of audio. Ji-yun sent it to Ivanka at 11:42 p.m. with no message attached. The audio file was enough. Ivanka listened to it twice sitting at her desk in the dark. Then she forwarded it to her lawyer, her financial crimes contact, and Song-yin with a single line. Tomorrow. Early. She slept 4 hours. She was dressed by 5:30 and at her desk by 6 with the audio file queued, Daniel's full communication archive open, and the specific focused energy of someone who could see the end of something from where they were standing and understood that the distance between here and there was not time but precision. Song-yin arrived at 6:45. He looked at her desk, the files, the open laptop, the coffee she'd already finished, and at her face, and said nothing about the 4 hours of sleep that were visible in the set of her jaw. He sat down. The audio is enough for the ministerial referral, he said. Yes. Your lawyer can file this morning. 7 a.m. She looked at him. Kwan needs to be suspended from the FRA pending investigation before he finds out the audio exists. If he knows we have it before the suspension is formalized, he can trigger a procedural challenge that ties it up for weeks. Speed, Song-yin said. Speed, she agreed. Her phone rang. Daniel. She answered. I have 3 more recordings, he said. No greeting. He'd been awake too. 2 from the same meeting, 1 from 6 months ago. Kwan is named in all 3. The oldest one includes a figure, a payment amount, and a timeline that maps directly to the period when your father's investigation first started gaining traction. Ivanka was very still. He was paid to bury your father's case specifically, she said. It looks that way. Daniel, send them to my lawyer right now. Everything. Already sending. She hung up, looked at Song-yin. For recordings, she said. Payment timeline mapping to my father's investigation. Something moved through Songyun's face, not satisfaction, something older and less clean than satisfaction. The expression of a man arriving at the end of something that began when he was 17 years old and has cost things along the way that don't get returned. Then it's enough, he said. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. She was wrong about one thing. She had been watching for the uncle's next move from the front. The legal challenge, the regulatory block, the institutional machinery he'd spent 30 years building and could still operate with Quan compromised. She had been watching the large things. She had stopped watching Chloe. Chloe had been in the uncle's orbit long enough to understand one thing clearly. She was running out of time inside it. The document hadn't worked. She knew this because the uncle's calls had gone from once every 2 days to once every 5, and the warmth in his voice when he did call had thinned to something that was technically still pleasant in the way that a room can be technically still warm after the heating has been off for an hour. She was being wound down. She understood the mechanism. She had watched it applied to Ethan with a front row seat and had thought at the time, with the specific arrogance of someone who believes they are categorically different from the person being managed, that it would never happen to her. It was happening to her, which meant she had a narrowing window of access before it closed completely, and the only thing she could think of to do with a narrowing window of access was use it. She had been watching the building. Not herself. She wasn't that reckless, and besides, Songyun's team had coverage on every approach she knew about. But she had a contact. Someone peripheral, someone who owed her a favor from a time before any of this, someone who worked in a coffee shop across from the building's car park and was willing, for a modest amount of money that Chloe no longer had, and put on a credit card she could barely service, to text her when certain vehicles arrived and left. It was amateur. She knew it was amateur. She had been watching professionals operate for 2 months, and she knew exactly how far below that level she was operating.
She did it anyway.
Because the alternative was her apartment and her ceiling, and the sound of nobody calling. She knew Ivanka's schedule had shifted. Earlier starts. The car arriving before 7 most mornings. She knew Songyun's team had a rotating security presence that changed pattern every 48 hours. She'd noticed this, had been watching long enough to notice, but she had also noticed that the rotation had a gap. Not in coverage exactly. In the overlap period between the outgoing and incoming detail. 8 minutes, approximately, when the handover happened on the car park level, and attention was on the transition rather than the perimeter. She passed this to the uncle on a Thursday evening.
Just the gap.
Just the timing. Just information. She told herself it was the last thing. That after this she was done. She was not thinking about what the gap might be used for. Or she was thinking about it, and had decided to let the thought live in a part of her mind she wasn't looking at directly. Friday morning. 6:58 a.m. The gap. Songyun's second detail was crossing the car park to relieve the outgoing team when the man they hadn't accounted for came from the building's service entrance, not the car park, or any of the approaches Ivanka's team had mapped, but the service level that connected to the adjacent building through a shared utility corridor that appeared on no publicly available floor plan. He moved fast. Purposeful. Not toward Ivanka, she wasn't in the car park. Toward Ji-Yun's assistant. A young man named Rio, who had been part of the operation since part 2, who made coffee and ran documents, and had been in the background of this story long enough that the audience knew his face, without knowing his name. He was crossing the car park with a laptop bag over one shoulder when the man reached him. It was over in under a minute. Rio went down hard. The bag was taken. He was conscious, barely, his hands on the concrete, trying to push himself up, when Songyun's incoming detail reached him 40 seconds later. The laptop bag had contained printed copies of Daniel's communication archive. Backup copies, not the originals. Ji-Yun ran a layered documentation system, and the originals were in 3 separate secure locations. The uncle's man had taken something that looked important, and was not the thing that mattered. But Rio had a broken wrist for stab wounds, a concussion, and was sitting on the cold concrete of a car park at 7 in the morning because of an 8-minute window that Chloe had mapped and passed along as just information. Ivanka got the call at 7:11. She was in her office. She listened. She asked 2 questions, Rio's condition, and whether the archive was compromised. Heard the answers. Thanked her security contact. She set the phone down. She sat completely still for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 2 things on the notepad in front of her. Rio, broken wrist, stab wounds, concussion. Stable. The gap, 8 minutes. Someone mapped it. She underlined the second line. She sat with what she knew. Chloe had the building address from part 2. She didn't have the security rotation. That was internal, changed every 48 hours, known only to Songyun's team and people who had been watching the building long enough to map a pattern. She looked at the underlined words. She thought about her sister sitting on a kitchen floor in an apartment that nobody visited. She thought about a woman who had burned every bridge available to her and was now building something out of the wreckage to throw. She didn't feel what she expected to feel. She felt tired. Tired the way you get tired of a storm, not frightened of it, just done with the sound of it. She picked up her phone. She called Songyun. "I know who mapped the gap," she said. A pause. "Yes," he said. "So do I." "Rio. He's asking for coffee and complaining about the hospital lighting," Songyun said. "He's fine." She let out a breath she hadn't named. "The archive is secure," Songyun said. "The lawyers have everything. The ministerial referral is filed. Kwan's suspension comes through this afternoon." His voice was steady. She took a man who was already losing and handed him a bag of printed copies. "She doesn't know that."
No.
Ivanka looked at the notepad. At the 2 lines. At the underlined words. "She's going to call the uncle to tell him it worked," she said. "And he's going to let her believe it did for long enough to get whatever he still needs from her." "Yes. And then she'll have nothing left."
She paused.
"Not us. Not him. Not anyone." Silence on the line. She picked up the pen and put a single cross through the underlined words. "Make sure Rio gets decent coffee," she said. "Not the machine. Somewhere real." She hung up. She opened the next file. Outside the window, the city ran its Friday morning, ordinary, indifferent, going about its business in the clean, early light of a day that had no idea what was being closed inside the building above it. She worked. The uncle called Chloe on Saturday morning. She answered before the first ring had finished, which told him everything he needed and which she understood. The moment she heard his voice had been a mistake she couldn't take back. "The operation Friday," he said. "Well done." She had been waiting for this. The validation. The warmth returning to full temperature. The feeling of being inside something rather than on the edge of it. It landed wrong. She couldn't explain why. The words were right. The tone was right. But she had spent enough time now watching how this man operated. The selective disclosure, the managed warmth, the way he released just enough approval to keep a person moving in the direction he needed, that some part of her received it differently than she would have 3 months ago.
"What did they get?" she said.
"Useful material," he said. "What specifically?" A small pause. "Backup documentation. Nothing critical."
She sat with that.
Nothing critical. He had sent someone through a service corridor at 7 in the morning for nothing critical. "Is Rio all right?" she said. The pause this time was longer. "Who?" he said. She closed her eyes. He didn't know the name. He had sent someone to do something physical to a person in a car park, and he did not know the name of that person, which meant he had not considered the person, which meant the person was not part of the calculation in any form that required knowing who they were. "Never mind," she said. "Chloe." The warmth, full and managed. "You've been invaluable. I want you to know that." Invaluable past tense. She knew that construction. She had used it herself. "Of course," she said. She hung up before he could. She sat in her apartment for 3 hours. She did not open her laptop. She did not check Marcus's thread, which had now climbed to 19,000 comments, and which she had stopped reading at 11,000 because comment 5,000 and something had said something accurate about her that she hadn't been able to shake since. She thought about Rio's name. The uncle didn't know it. She did. She had heard it in passing months ago, someone mentioning the young man who ran documents and made coffee for Jian's team. She had filed it without meaning to, the way you absorb peripheral details about a world you're paying close attention to. Rio. Broken wrist. Stab wounds. Concussion. She had passed along an 8-minute window as just information, and a young man she knew the name of was sitting in a hospital with a broken wrist, an almost fatal blow, and she had not at any point, she now understood, actually believed that nothing would happen to anyone. She had just decided not to look at that part. She opened her laptop. Not to send anything. Not to research or map or build anything new. She opened Daniel's name in her contacts. She had added it 3 weeks ago from a mutual legal notification and sat with it. She had never spoken to him. She knew, from the fragments of information that reached her through social channels and mutual contacts and the specific osmosis of a closely watched situation, that he had switched sides, that he had met with Ivanka, that he had handed over 18 months of communications. She had thought, when she first heard this, that he was naive. She thought about it differently now. She closed the laptop. She went to her kitchen and made tea she didn't drink and stood at the window looking at the street below. Ordinary Saturday morning. A man walking a dog. 2 teenagers on the corner sharing something from a paper bag. The unremarkable texture of a city going about its weekend. She was 23 years old. She had burned Ethan and Marcus and her professional reputation and her relationship with her mother and whatever remained of her relationship with Ivanka, and she had done all of it in the service of a man who did not know the name of the person he had put in a hospital on her information. She thought about Songyun in the corridor. She builds. You've been watching her your whole life, and you still think what she has is luck. She had hated him for it in the moment. She hated him less now. She picked up her phone. She didn't call anyone. She put it face down on the counter and drank the cold tea and stayed at the window until the man with the dog came back from the other direction and went into the building across the street, and the two teenagers were gone, and the corner was empty. Daniel found the second crack on a Sunday. He had been working through his own archive, not Ji-Yun's processed version, his raw files, the unedited record of 18 months, with the specific focused attention of a man who has realized he was deceived and needs to understand the full dimensions of the deception before he can trust his own judgment again. He found it in a document the uncle had given him in month 3. A biographical summary of his biological father. Park Sung-jin. Clean, sympathetic, the portrait of a man of integrity whose estate had been mismanaged after his death. Daniel had read it in month 3 and accepted it. He read it now with different eyes. The document described his father's death. Cardiac arrest. Age 57. Daniel checked the date against the estate timeline. His father had died 14 months after Ivanka's father. He pulled the medical summary included in the same document. Standard cardiac event. No prior indicators. He sat back. He pulled up the notes from his conversation with Ivanka. Full cardiac workup 8 weeks before he died.
Clean.
No indicators. Her father. He looked at his father's medical summary. No mention of a prior workup. He called his mother. She answered on the second ring. His health, Daniel said. In the year before he died. Did he have any medical appointments you remember? Checkups. Cardiology. His mother was quiet for a moment. There was something, she said slowly. He called me. We were still in contact then, less than before, but still occasionally. He said he'd had a full cardiac panel done. Clean results. He seemed relieved about it.
A pause.
This was maybe 2 months before he died. Daniel closed his eyes. Open them.
Thank you, he said.
He called Ivanka before he'd fully processed what he was calling to say. She answered on the second ring. My father, he said. Park Sung-jin. Full cardiac panel 2 months before he died. Clean results. Silence on the line. A long silence. Same method, she said. Same method, he said. We need an exhumation order, Ivanka said. For mine too, Daniel said. Yes. That's 2 exhumation orders across 2 jurisdictions. Yes. That requires. I know what it requires. Her voice was even. It requires Quan out of the FRA, which happens today. It requires the ministerial referral to have traction, which it does. It requires a prosecutor willing to take the forensic angles seriously. A pause. And it requires you and me both signing the applications as biological next of kin. Daniel was quiet for a moment. 2 people who had met across a courtroom 12 days ago, who had sat in a restaurant and found the specific tentative beginning of something that wasn't yet a name, who shared a jawline and a dead father, and now shared a second dead father. Send me the paperwork, he said.
Tonight, she said.
She paused. Daniel. Something in her voice that was different from the operational register she defaulted to. Smaller, less constructed. I'm sorry about your father. He looked at the window of his hotel room. The city outside, different from Edinburgh. Not yet familiar. I'm sorry about yours, he said. A beat.
Our fathers, she said.
Our fathers, he said. He hung up and sat with that for a long time. Song-in got the call at 9 p.m. Not from Ivanka. From Ji-Yun, who had received it from the security contact, who had received it from a source inside the uncle's private office, a source Song-in had placed there 14 months ago and had never activated until now. He read the message twice. Then he called Ivanka. She answered immediately. She had been awake. He knows about the exhumation, Song-in said. Someone in the ministerial office leaked the application. He knows both names, both jurisdictions, the forensic angle. Silence. How long before he moves on it, she said. He's already moving. Song-in stood, reached for his jacket. There's a flight out of the city tonight. Private. Filed 2 hours ago. Destination is not the registered address.
He's running, she said.
He's repositioning, Song-in said. Running is panic. This is calculated withdrawal. He goes somewhere with friendlier jurisdiction while his lawyers fight the exhumation applications and the FRA investigation and the ministerial referral simultaneously. He can do that for years from the right location. Then he doesn't get on the flight. No, Song-in said. He doesn't. She was at the window when he came in, not working, just standing there in the dark of the office with the city lit up below her and her arms crossed loosely at her waist. Not defensive, just the posture of a person who has put everything down for a moment and doesn't quite know what to do with their hands without it. She heard him come in. She didn't turn around. He didn't say anything either. She heard him set something down, his keys, his phone. The small sounds of a man making himself at home in a room he'd spent enough time in to move through it without needing the lights. Then his footsteps crossed the office. And he came up behind her. His arms came around her from behind. Not sudden, not tentative, just a slow and certain arrival, his chest against her back, both arms wrapping around her and staying there. His chin came to rest at her temple. She felt the warmth of him all along her back. She uncrossed her arms. She put her hands over his. Outside the city ran its quiet late evening, lights in 100 windows, a bus moving through the street below, the ordinary distant hum of 10 million people living their lives at full volume, while the world inside this office went completely still. She didn't think about the exhumation orders. She didn't think about the uncle or the terminal or what happened tomorrow. She stood inside his arms and looked at the city and let herself be exactly where she was, not ahead of it, not managing it, not moving through it toward the next thing. Just here. Just this. His arms tightened slightly. Not urgency, just presence. The specific language of someone telling you they're not going anywhere without using any words. She turned. Not all the way, just enough. She turned inside his arms and looked at his face in the low light of the office, the city behind her throwing pale light across his features, and she looked at him the way she almost never let herself look at anything that wasn't a document or a problem that needed solving. Without agenda. Just him. He looked back. Quiet.
Still.
His hands at her back not pulling, just there. She kissed him. Soft first. The way things begin when they've been building long enough that the beginning is almost a formality, both of you already have known, are simply finally arriving at the thing you've been walking toward. He kissed her back with both hands moving to her face, thumbs at her jaw, and she felt the specific quality of being held by someone who was absolutely certain about where they were and had no interest in being anywhere else. When she pulled back, she stayed close, eyes open. His forehead against hers. The city outside. The quiet office. His hands still at her jaw. I keep thinking about him, she said. Quietly. My father. What the last year was like for him. Knowing what he knew and still, she stopped. Still making the soup, Songyun said. She looked at him. Still building the ordinary things, he said. On purpose. She held his gaze. Her father in a restaurant in London, laying out the map of everything, still thinking about a son in Edinburgh and a daughter who didn't know yet, and a young man he trusted with both of them. Still choosing every day the things worth choosing. We should do that, she said. When this is over. Something ordinary. Yes, he said. I don't know what that looks like for me.
We'll find out, he said.
Simple. Certain. The way he said everything he meant. She leaned into him, her head against his chest. His arms back around her, one hand at her hair, slow and unhurried. Outside the city kept going. Inside the office, everything stopped. She stayed there, not thinking, not planning, not moving toward anything, until the weight of the day settled into something she could carry again. Then she straightened. She smoothed his jacket where she'd creased it. He looked at her with the expression she'd catalogued as the thing his face did when something genuinely landed. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. She picked up her bag. He held the door. They left the office together, and the city was cold and ongoing outside, and neither of them said anything else, and neither of them needed to. The flight was scheduled for 1:15 a.m. Private terminal. East side of the city's secondary airport, smaller than the main hub, less supervised, the kind of facility that processed a sufficient volume of private charters that one more caused no particular interest. Songyun had 2 hours. He didn't bring the full team. Byun, 2 of the senior security detail, and a lawyer, not Ivankas, his own, the one who handled the parts of his operation that existed in the space between what was legal and what was necessary and knew how to navigate both, without losing footing in either. He told Ivanka at 10 p.m. She was already in the car. You're not coming, he said. I'm already in the car, she said. Ivanka. He killed my father, she said. And Daniel's father. And he put Rio in a hospital, and he has spent 30 years building something on the bodies of people who trusted him. Her voice was completely level. I am coming. A silence. Stay in the car when we arrive, he said. Until I tell you otherwise. Fine. I mean it. I heard you. He looked at the phone for a moment after she said it, the specific combination of compliance and absolute refusal to be managed that he had stopped trying to resolve weeks ago because it was simply who she was, and he had, somewhere along the way, stopped experiencing it as a problem.
20 minutes, he said.
The private terminal was quiet. 3 staff visible. 2 vehicles in the drop-off bay. Warm light through the glass of the departure lounge, the kind of light that was meant to feel exclusive and managed only to feel isolated. The uncle's car arrived at 12:40. He stepped out with 2 men, not bodyguards exactly, something more administrative, the kind of people who carried cases and managed logistics. He was dressed for travel. Unhurried. A man catching a flight. Nothing more. Moving through the terminal with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times in many cities and found it unremarkable. He made it 12 feet inside the door. Songyun was at the far end of the lounge. He stood when the uncle entered. Didn't move toward him. Just stood. And the quality of his stillness in that moment was the specific stillness of someone who has been moving toward this point for a very long time and has now arrived and is in no hurry at all. The uncle saw him. He stopped. His two men stopped behind him. For a moment nobody moved. Then the uncle did what he always did, he rearranged. The surprise, which had shown for 2 seconds, was folded back and the warmth came forward, and he walked towards Songyun with the open body language of a man running into an old acquaintance under unexpected circumstances. Seo-jun, he said. The Korean name. Deliberate. Sit down, Songyun said. The uncle looked at the chairs. At Songyun's lawyer standing to the left. At the 2 security detail positioned at the exits, without appearing to be positioned anywhere.
He sat down.
The exhumation applications are filed, Songyun said. Both of them. They were filed 4 hours ago and the ministerial office has already confirmed receipt and preliminary review. He sat across from the uncle. Kwan's suspension from the FRA was formalized this afternoon. His cooperation agreement with the Financial Crimes Unit was signed this evening. He's already given a preliminary account that names you directly in relation to the regulatory interference and the payment timeline. The uncle looked at him. The warmth was still there. It was extraordinary, actually, the man's ability to maintain the surface temperature regardless of what was happening underneath it. You've been busy, the uncle said. We have 4 audio recordings of you naming Kwan directly and discussing a payment timeline that maps to the period of the original investigation into the estate. Songyun held his gaze. We have 18 months of documented communications with Daniel Park showing the methodology you used to construct his understanding of his own history. We have Banwo's complete archive, which includes your name in your brother-in-law's own handwriting. He paused. And we have 2 exhumation applications for 2 men who both had clean cardiac panels 6 to 8 weeks before dying of cardiac events. The uncle was quiet. The flight isn't going to help, Songyun said. There is no jurisdiction you can reach tonight that doesn't have an existing cooperation agreement with the relevant authorities here. Your lawyer knows this. I suspect you do too. A long silence. The terminal hummed around them. The distant sound of an aircraft somewhere on the tarmac, the low noise of the building's ventilation, a staff member's radio crackling briefly and going quiet. You're your father's son, the uncle said. Not unkindly, as if it were an observation rather than a provocation. Something moved through Songyun's face.
Fast. Gone.
My father was a better man than you deserved access to, Songyun said. The uncle looked at his hands. For the first time in the conversation, in any conversation Songyun had observed or heard accounted, he looked at something other than the person in front of him. Young Kyung Park, Songyun's lawyer said, stepping forward. I am serving you with a formal notice of civil proceedings in relation to the estate of the late Park Sung-jin and the estate of the late. The uncle stood. Not aggressively. Just stood. The way a man stands when he has made a decision and is implementing it. His 2 men moved. And then everything happened in approximately 40 seconds. The first man came from the left, towards Songyun's lawyer, not Songyun, which was the calculation of someone who understood that removing the legal instrument was more immediately useful than engaging the person who was clearly not going to be easy to engage. Songyun moved before the man had completed the first step.
Fast. Decisive.
The specific economy of someone who had not spent the last 20 years building an operation like his by being slow in rooms that turned physical.
The first man went down.
The second came from behind. He reached Songyun, got a hand on his shoulder, spun him, and the next 4 seconds were close and ungraceful and real in the way that made the choreographed version of it look like what it was. Songyun took a hit to the ribs. Hard enough. He felt it. A bright specific pain that he catalogued and set aside because there wasn't time for it yet. He put the second man on the floor. He straightened up. His hand went to his side automatically, pressing against the ribs, and he made himself stop doing that before he turned to face the room. The uncle was at the door. He had used the 40 seconds to reach the exit, unhurried, while his men managed the room, the exit strategy of a man who had planned for this possibility. He pushed the door open. He walked through it, into the drop-off bay, where Ivanka was standing beside Songyun's car. She had stayed in the car. For 11 minutes, she had stayed in the car and watched the terminal through the window and told herself she would stay there until he told her otherwise. Then she had seen the uncle's 2 men through the glass. Then she had seen the 40 seconds. Then she had gotten out of the car. She was standing in the drop-off bay with her arms at her sides and her face doing nothing in particular when the door opened and her uncle walked through it. He saw her. He stopped. For a moment he looked at her the way he had looked at her across the private dining room, the assessment, the recalibration, the managed warmth loading itself back into position. She looked at him the way she had looked at the forged signatures and the shell company structure, and the 3 lines of her father's handwriting on page 31, with the clear-eyed absence of illusion.
There's nowhere to go, she said.
He looked at the bay, the exits, the street beyond. Ivanka, he said, still warm, still patient. The voice of a man who believed the right sentence could still turn this. You understand that none of this brings him back.
No, she said.
It doesn't. Then what is this for? Because he deserves to be the last one, she said. He deserves to be the last person you do this to. The uncle looked at her. Something underneath the warmth shifted, not broke, shifted. A load-bearing thing finding a new position. He loved you, the uncle said. And this, strangely, of everything he had said in every room, sounded the most unmanaged. The most actual. He talked about you constantly. Every time we spoke. Even at the end. He paused. I want you to know that. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I have his letter. The door behind the uncle opened. Songin walked through it. One hand at his side. Not pressing anymore. She could see the effort of not pressing. His face controlled. His eyes going to her first, a fast check, then to the uncle. The security detail came through behind him. And Songin's lawyer. And 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Unit who had been waiting in a vehicle at the perimeter since 11 p.m. The uncle looked at all of it. He looked at Ivanka one last time. Then he looked at his hands. He didn't run.
He didn't speak.
He stood in the drop-off bay of a private terminal at 12:57 in the morning while the city went about its night around him and let the officers reach him without resistance. Ivanka watched. She stood where she was and watched it happen. The formal words, the documentation, the quiet machinery of consequence arriving at the end of a very long road. Then Songin was beside her. She looked at his hand, at the way he was holding himself, the slight lean away from the left side that he was working not to show. Your ribs, she said.
Fine, he said.
Songin.
2.
Maybe 3. He glanced at her. I've had worse. That's a terrible answer. It's an accurate one. She looked at him, at the terminal light catching the side of his face, at the controlled expression doing its job over something that had clearly cost him, at the man who had walked into a ballroom and placed his jacket over her shoulders and had been, in every room since, exactly where he said he would be. She reached up. Her hand went to his jaw, not tentative, not questioning, just her hand on his face the way she did things, with the directness of a woman who had decided and was implementing. He went very still. Thank you, she said, quietly, just between them. For all of it. For my father's ask and for every room after it and for tonight. He looked at her. The debt is.
Don't, she said.
Don't say it's the debt. He closed his mouth. He looked at her hand on his face. Then he put his hand over hers, not moving it, just covering it, warm and certain and staying there. It stopped being the debt a long time ago, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. The drop-off bay, the terminal light, the uncle in the background being processed with quiet efficiency. The city going about its night, indifferent, ongoing, not pausing for any of it. I know, she said. She didn't move her hand. He didn't move his. They stood there for a moment that neither of them rushed. 2 people at the end of something long and costly, in the specific still air of a thing that has finally landed where it was always going. Then his ribs made the decision for both of them. He exhaled, sharp, involuntary, the breath of a man whose controlled surface had just been overruled by 2 fractured bones. She dropped her hand immediately.
Hospital, she said.
It's fine.
Hospital, she said. Right now.
Get in the car. He looked at her. I will physically put you in the car, she said. Something crossed his face. You could try, he said. Kim Songin. He got in the car. Kwan's suspension was formalized on a Monday. By Wednesday, his cooperation agreement had expanded from a preliminary account into a full formal statement, 47 pages, specific, chronological, the detailed account of an 11-year institutional arrangement delivered by a man who had understood, the moment Songin's lawyer placed the audio recordings on the table, that his only remaining asset was the quality of what he knew and how quickly he could make it useful.
He named dates, amounts,
methods. The specific mechanism by which 2 cardiac investigations had been administratively buried before reaching the level of scrutiny that would have made them impossible to close. He named the uncle on 17 separate counts. He named 2 other officials in adjacent institutions whose positions had served similar functions in different jurisdictions, names that neither Ivanka nor Songin had on their lists, names that expanded the structure outward in directions that would take separate proceedings months to fully map. He named, on page 31 of his statement, a property in Jeju Island registered to a holding entity that contained physical records, hard copy, the uncle's own hand, the particular paranoia of a man who didn't fully trust digital storage, covering 14 years of operational decisions. Jian had a team on a flight to Jeju by Thursday morning. The exhumation applications moved faster than expected. Daniel had spent 4 days working with Ivanka's legal team on the forensic toxicology angle, not as a witness, as a collaborator, in the way he had folded himself into the operation with the same methodical, focused energy she recognized from across a hearing room and understood now as simply how he was wired. He sat at the desk across from Jian and worked through jurisdiction timelines and preservation probability assessments and the specific procedural requirements of 2 different legal systems with the focused attention of a man who needed the work as much as the work needed him. On Thursday afternoon, both applications were approved. Ivanka was in the office when her lawyer called with the confirmation. She listened, said thank you, hung up. She sat for a moment. Then she looked across the desk at Daniel.
Both, she said.
He nodded slowly. Neither of them said anything else for a while.
They didn't need to.
Songyan had 2 fractured ribs and a bruise along his left side that had developed, over the 48 hours since the terminal, into something impressively colored that he declined to show anyone and that Ivanka knew about only because Jian had mentioned it with a flat informational tone of someone filing a relevant operational update. He worked through it. Of course he worked through it. He came in at 7 every morning and sat at the desk and managed the Jeju retrieval and the cooperation agreement and the 2 additional officials and the forensic toxicology coordination with the same economy of movement and expression he brought to everything, except that he occasionally shifted in his chair at a particular angle that he immediately stopped doing when he noticed her noticing. She brought him coffee one morning without being asked. He looked at it, then at her. Jian told you, he said. Jian tells me everything, she said. You know this. I need to have a conversation with Jian. You need to take the painkillers the hospital prescribed. They make me slow. You have 2 fractured ribs. Slow is the medically recommended state. He drank the coffee. She took that as a partial victory and returned to her desk. Across the room, Daniel looked up from his document, clocked what had just happened, and looked back down at his document with the particular focused neutrality of a man who had decided he had not seen anything. The records from Jeju arrived on a Friday. Physical documents, scanned and transmitted in batches. Jian's team worked through the night in a rented office space and sent files in chronological order as they processed them, each batch landing in Ivanka's secure inbox with a timestamp and a brief summary note. The 4th batch, arriving at 3:17 a.m., contained a folder labeled in the uncle's handwriting with a date from 16 years ago. Inside it, a document that was not a financial record or an operational note or any of the administrative material that had filled the previous 3 batches. It was a letter, handwritten, Korean, addressed to Ivanka's father. Never sent. Jian's translation note at the top was 3 words. You should read this. Ivanka read it alone. She sent Songyan a message at 3:45 a.m. Go to sleep, I'll brief you in the morning, and sat at her desk and read her uncle's unsent letter to her father in the specific silence of a building at 4 a.m. when the city outside had finally reached its quietest point. It was not what she expected. Her uncle had loved her father. That was the thing the letter made undeniable, not the managed warmth, not the performance of fraternal feeling deployed at strategic moments, but something real and old, and entirely incompatible with everything he had done. He had written, in the unsent letter, about the years before the betrayal, about the person her father was, about the specific quality of her father's belief in people, including in him, and how that belief had been, for a long time, the thing in his life he valued most. He had written about the moment he had chosen the other thing. Not dramatically. He described it the way you describe a weather event, something that happened, that had causes, that he had watched himself make and had understood was irreversible and had made anyway. And then he had never sent the letter. He had kept it in a folder in a property in Jeju for 16 years, which was its own kind of confession, the proof that he knew exactly what he had done and had never once convinced himself it was anything other than what it was. Ivanka folded the translation. She sat with it. She thought about a man who could love someone genuinely and destroy them systematically, and how those 2 things had lived in the same person for 30 years without resolving into each other. She thought about what her father had written. I made sure of that. He had made sure. Even knowing who his brother-in-law was and what he was capable of, he had spent his last years making sure the people he loved had what they needed to survive the aftermath. She put the letter in the drawer with the first envelope, the one that said not yet love on the front. She would open that one when this was finished. Not yet. Forensic document analysis of the Jeju records later confirmed the letter's authenticity and established its date as 6 months before Ivanka's father's death, placing it in the same period as his London meeting with Songyan and his final additions to Banwo's archive. The letter was submitted as character evidence in the criminal proceedings and read, in part, into the court record. The criminal proceedings were filed on a Tuesday. 17 counts. The uncle's legal team filed 3 immediate challenges, all of which were denied within 48 hours. Kwan's cooperation statement was comprehensive enough that procedural challenges had very little to grip. The Jeju records provided the physical documentation. Daniel's audio recordings provided the methodology. Banwo's archive provided the historical foundation. The case, Ivanka's lawyer told her on the phone, was as solid as anything he had seen in 20 years of practice. How long, she said. Proceedings of this complexity. Ballpark. 18 months to trial, he said. Possibly less with the cooperation agreement factoring in. And the exhumation results. Toxicology is 8 to 12 weeks. If the results are what we expect, a pause, they become the centerpiece of the criminal case. Everything else is the frame. The toxicology is the thing that makes it uncontestable. She thanked him and hung up. 18 months. Her father had waited 3 years and run out of time. She could wait 18 months. Chloe called on a Wednesday evening. Not Ivanka's direct line, her lawyer's office number, which suggested either that she had prepared this call in advance or that she had been talked into it by someone with enough operational sense to know that calling directly would end before it started. Ivanka's lawyer forwarded the message. Chloe Park requests a meeting. She says she has information relevant to the proceedings. She says she wants to give a formal account. Her words, she wants it on record. Ivanka read the message twice. She thought about her sister on a kitchen floor. She thought about Rio's broken wrist. She thought about an 8-minute gap mapped and passed along as just information. She thought about Marcus's thread and the document she'd sent to the journalist, and the 4 people, and the way Chloe had looked across the office that night. Furious and frightened and so deeply, specifically jealous that it had become its own kind of damage, the kind that forms when a wound goes untreated for long enough that it calcifies into shape. She typed back to her lawyer. Tell her to come in. Friday. With her own legal representation. She put her phone down. Daniel looked up from the desk across from her. Chloe, he said. She looked at him, at her father's jawline, at the eyes she recognized, at the man who had flown from Edinburgh with 18 months of recordings and pushed a folder across a restaurant table and said, I don't want what's yours. Yes, she said. He nodded. He looked back at his documents. She's not going to have an easy Friday, he said. No, Ivanka said. She's not. A beat. Good, he said. She looked at him. He looked up and caught her expression. Too much, he said.
No, she said.
It was exactly right. He went back to his document. She went back to hers. Outside the window, the city ran its Wednesday evening, ordinary, ongoing, indifferent to the proceedings and the exhumation orders and the 17 counts and the unsent letter in the drawer and the 2 people in an office working through files at 7 p.m. because neither of them knew how to do this any other way. The toxicology results came on a Thursday morning 8 weeks later. Both of them. Her father. Daniel's father. Positive for a compound, a specific synthetic variant of a substance that suppressed cardiac electrical function, developed originally in a pharmaceutical research context and diverted, according to a forensic pharmacologist's accompanying report, through a supply chain that traced back to a procurement entity connected to the uncle's network. Undetectable in standard post-mortem screening. Identifiable in preserved tissue samples through a targeted panel that had only been developed in the last 6 years. Her father had been right about everything. He had just run out of time before the science caught up to what his uncle had done. Ivanka read the report at her desk. She read it completely, all 22 pages, the technical language and the chain of custody documentation and the forensic pharmacologist's conclusion section, which was written in the careful measured language of expert testimony and which said, in its final paragraph, that the findings were consistent with deliberate administration and inconsistent with natural cardiac events in both subjects. She put it down. She looked at the window. The city outside. Morning light, clean and pale, coming in across the rooftops at the specific angle it reached in this season, the angle that meant the day was going to be clear and cold and entirely indifferent. Her father was in that report. 22 pages of forensic science and chain of custody documentation and the specific measured language of proof, and somewhere inside all of it was a man who had laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them and had believed the world would be decent if you were decent in it, and had spent his last years quietly, carefully, making sure the people he loved had what they needed for the world that came after him. She opened the drawer. She took out the second envelope. Not yet, love. She broke the seal. His handwriting was looser in this one. The later hand, the tired hand, the one that had been present in the final pages of the first letter. But the words were clear. It was short. 4 paragraphs. The first told her she had done it. He didn't say what it was, he didn't need to. He had written this knowing she would open it at the right moment, and the right moment would tell her what it was. The second told her about her mother. Not defensively, not in anger, with the specific compassion of a man who had processed something painful over a long time and come out the other side of it with understanding rather than bitterness. He asked her to try. Not to excuse. Not to forget. Just to try when she was ready, to understand that people were capable of being more than the worst thing they had participated in. He said he had believed this about everyone in his life, sometimes wrongly, and that he intended to keep believing it anyway. The third paragraph was about Songyun. He is not an easy man. He carries things quietly and releases them slowly, and will not always tell you when something costs him. You will have to watch for that.
I think you already know how.
She stopped reading for a moment, looked at the window, kept reading. I chose him because I knew what he was made of. I think by the time you read this you will know too. Whatever you decide, I trust you. I always have. That was never a small thing. The fourth paragraph was 2 sentences. The second envelope was always for after. Now go live in the after, love. You've earned every inch of it. She folded the letter. She held it in both hands for a moment. Then she put it back in the envelope, carefully, along the original creases, and placed it in the drawer next to the first one. She closed the drawer. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the office with the morning light coming in and the city going about its Thursday outside the window. Then she picked up her phone and called Songyun. He answered on the first ring. The results came, she said. A silence. Just one beat. Then, I'm coming. I know, she said. Bring coffee. Not the machine. She heard something in his exhale and chuckled. 20 minutes, he said. She set the phone down. Daniel came in at 9. He had the toxicology report already. Jian had sent it simultaneously to everyone on the case distribution list at 7 a.m., and he had read it. She could tell in the same way she had. All of it.
Completely.
Without stopping.
He set his bag down.
He looked at her across the office. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. He knew, Daniel said. Our father. He knew what had been done, and he built the whole thing anyway, the lawyer, the trust, the archive. He built the exact case that caught it. Yes, she said. He just needed the science to catch up. Yes. Daniel nodded slowly. He sat down. He picked up the file in front of him and opened it to the first page.
He stopped.
He looked at the page for a moment. I didn't know him, he said.
Quietly.
I have documents and letters and things you've told me, and the way Songyun talks about him. He paused. But I didn't know him. No, she said. Do you think he knew about me? At the end. Whether I was, he stopped. Found the word. Whether I was all right. She looked at her brother across the desk. At the jawline they shared. At the eyes she recognized in her own mirror. At the man who had come from Edinburgh with 18 months of recordings and chosen, at every point where he could have gone the other way, to keep choosing correctly. He knew, she said. Songyun told him. Before he died. She held Daniel's gaze. He told Songyun you were methodical and serious, and that you reminded him of himself at 30, and that he wished he'd found a way to know you. Daniel looked at the file. He pressed his lips together. He didn't say anything. She let him not say anything. After a moment, he turned the page and kept reading. She turned back to her own work. Outside the window the city went about its Thursday. Below them, somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. A phone rang in another office and was answered. The ordinary infrastructure of a day that did not know it was different from any other day. Songyun arrived at 9:20 with 2 coffees from the place 3 streets over that neither of them had ever discussed preferring but had somehow become the only option. He put one in front of her without a word. He looked at her face. She looked at his. He sat down. He didn't ask if she was all right. He had learned over the weeks of this, that asking her that question produced a specific expression that meant she was fine, and found the question slightly beside the point.
So he didn't ask.
He opened his files. She opened hers. Daniel worked across the desk from them both. The 3 of them in a room, in the morning light, doing the work that remained because there was still work, there would be work for months yet, proceedings and toxicology hearings and the uncle's trial and the 2 additional officials, and everything that had to be built in the space where the old structure used to be. It was not finished. It was just different now. Chloe's Friday meeting lasted 3 hours. She came with a lawyer. Young, competent, clearly prepared. She sat across from Ivanka's legal team in a conference room and gave a formal account of everything. The uncle's initial contact, the breakfast, the envelope, the document she'd sent, the address, the gap. All of it. She didn't look at Ivanka during most of it. When she did, once, near the end, when she was describing the morning she'd found out about Rio, her face did something that Ivanka had not seen on it before. Not guilt exactly. Something rawer than guilt. The expression of a person looking at the full dimensions of something they did and finding the dimensions larger than they'd allowed themselves to see. Ivanka looked back at her. She didn't reach across the table. She didn't have a speech prepared. She just looked at her sister. At the face she had known her whole life. At the woman who had wanted so badly to be chosen first that she had burned everything around her trying to manufacture the conditions for it, and felt something that was not forgiveness yet, and not hardness either. Something in between. Something that might, with enough time and enough distance, and enough of both of them choosing correctly on enough consecutive days, eventually become something else. After. Not yet. The mother came to the office on a Saturday. Not summoned. She called Ivanka's direct line on a Friday evening and asked, in the voice of a woman who had been preparing a sentence for a long time, if she could come in. Ivanka said yes. She arrived precisely on time in a coat Ivanka hadn't seen before. Not silver, dark green, the deliberate choice of a woman who had decided to appear differently than she had been appearing. She sat across from Ivanka. She had brought nothing. No lawyer, no documents, no prepared statement. She looked at her daughter. I'm not going to ask you to understand it, she said. I know what I participated in. I know what it cost. She folded her hands in her lap. The gesture Ivanka had watched across 100 dinner tables, but quieter now, less constructed. I want to tell you something about your father. Something he asked me to tell you, if I ever found the courage. Ivanka waited. He forgave me, her mother said, before he died. Not because what I did was forgivable, because he said he couldn't spend whatever time he had left carrying it and loving you at the same time, and he chose loving you. Her voice was very steady, the steadiness of something that had been practiced many times in private. He said that was always going to be the easier choice. The office was completely still. Ivanka looked at her mother, at the green coat, at the folded hands, at the face of a woman sitting inside consequences she had spent 11 years building, and was now living in without the uncle beside her, and without Chloe positioned between them, and without any of the structure she had used to avoid looking directly at what she'd done. He said something to me once, Ivanka said, in the letter. She paused. He asked me to try. When I was ready. She looked at her mother. I'm not ready yet. Her mother nodded. I know, she said. I didn't come for ready. I came to tell you what he said. She stood, picked up her bag. Take whatever time you need. She walked to the door. She stopped. He was proud of you, she said, without turning around. Every day. The ordinary days too. Not just this. A pause. He used to say he got the best of everyone in the room without trying, and it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. She left. Ivanka sat alone for a moment. Then she opened the drawer. She looked at the 2 envelopes. She closed the drawer. She picked up her coffee. She went back to work. On a Sunday afternoon 3 weeks later, with the proceedings underway and the toxicology confirmed and the Jeju records being processed by 3 separate legal teams, Ivanka and Songyun walked along the river. Not for any reason. He had appeared at her office door at 2 p.m. with his jacket on and said, "Come on," and she had looked at the files on her desk and then at him and put her coat on without argument, which surprised them both slightly. The river was cold and the light was low and the city ran alongside them on both banks, going about its Sunday with a particular unhurried quality of a day that had no agenda. They walked without talking for a while. This was, she had discovered, one of the specific things about him. He did not fill silence. He inhabited it the way he inhabited rooms, with the ease of someone who had made peace with his own company long ago and didn't require noise to confirm that another person was present. She had started to find it, against all reasonable expectation, restful. Daniel's going back to Edinburgh next week, she said. I know. Temporarily. He's coming back for the preliminary hearing. Yes. She watched the river, gray and moving, catching the low afternoon light in interrupted pieces. He asked me what her father was like, she said. At the restaurant. First meeting. What did you tell him? I didn't know what to say yet. She paused. I know now. Songyun looked at her. He was the kind of person, she said slowly, who made you feel like the room was better organized around you. Not because he did anything deliberate, just because of how he paid attention. She paused. You've met maybe 3 people like that in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Songyun was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's exactly right. They walked. The river moved beside them, indifferent and ongoing. He said you weren't easy, she said. Songyun looked at the river. He said you carry things quietly and release them slowly and don't always say when something costs you. She glanced at him. He said I'd have to watch for it. He told you this in the letter. Yes. A pause. He wasn't wrong, Songyun said. I know, she said. I've been watching for it since the hotel suite. He looked at her. She looked back. The river. The low light. The city going about its Sunday on both banks, ordinary and ongoing and entirely indifferent to two people stopped on a path above the water with the particular quality of stillness between them that had been building since a ballroom and a jacket placed over a pair of shoulders and a 43-second phone call and a photograph of a garden in summer. He reached across. He took her hand, not tentatively, not as a question. The way he did everything, with the certainty of a decision already made and a man who, once decided, did not second-guess. She looked at their hands, then at him. The debt, she started, is gone, he said. Has been gone for a long time.
Then what is this? She said.
He looked at her with the directness he brought to rooms and documents and 43-second phone calls from men who wanted to establish hierarchy. This, he said, is what I would have come back for anyway. She held his gaze. The river moved. The city went about its Sunday. She tightened her hand in his. They kept walking. Lovelies. We started in a ballroom. A woman in a burgundy dress who already knew everything, waiting for the right audience. A man who walked through a door and placed his jacket over her shoulders and said, "Sorry, I'm late." We ended at a river. Ivanka didn't just get her estate back. She got the truth about her father, a brother she didn't know existed, and the clearest possible proof that the people who underestimated her did so at considerable personal cost. Drop one word in the comments. Just one. That describes this entire journey. And if you watched all of this without subscribing, I genuinely don't know what to tell you.
Hit subscribe.
Because the next story I'm bringing you, my lovelies, it will wreck you. In the best way. I promise.